Our topic today, Peggy Hopkins, Ziegfeld Follies girl turned movie actress, more well known for her marriages and dalliances than for her acting. Peggy was born Margaret Upton on May 26, 1893 in Virginia. She started her career on the stage in the Ziegfeld Follies on Broadway, having been discovered by famous comedian W.C. Fields. But as I said, her Broadway stints and movie roles were not what she was known for. This isn't a shaming video about how many marriages she had. That in and of itself is not of any consequence. What is interesting about her, well, you'll see. We're going to start in what was probably her first appearance in the newspapers in May 1910. At this time, she was working as an assistant under the name Margaret Canada to a Louis Guertin. He was known as the champion jumper of the world and worked in vaudeville. Apparently, Guertin physically hit her in a fit of jealousy and rage in the Wilson Hotel. Peggy said about the incident, quote, "Though he is married and has a daughter 10 years of age, Guertin fell in love with me at Norfolk, Virginia, and when he invited me to go on the road with him and take part in his act, I decided to run away from home. I was then very young. I will only be 18 years on my next birthday. Guertin only paid me a salary, and once he gave me a pair of small diamond rings, which he tore from my fingers when he struck me last night. He had no reason for beating me. I only walked to the elevator to go down to get some lunch, and a man whom I never knew followed me. Guertin probably thought that I had made a date with him." End quote. Guertin, giving his side, said, quote, "I am in love with Margaret, and she knows it. She has not been true to me. I had been planning to get a divorce with the intention of marrying her. Whenever I bought her fine clothes and gave her diamonds, Margaret sort of looked down on me and tried to find other suitors. I didn't like this, and when I saw her in the company of another man at 11 o'clock last night, I lost all control of myself." End quote. Guertin subsequently had some of his future performances canceled while he was in jail. She said she was going to press charges, but I couldn't find when and if she did that. Oh, that's all, you're asking? Ha! And then boom, like a day after she met him, she got married to Everett Archer, a traveling salesman in Denver. The Salt Lake Herald-republican seemed to think that Archer and Guertin were the same person, but Archer said that no. Guertin was a friend of his. Archer was helping Peggy while Guertin was in jail, and then Archer married her. The marriage was annulled within the year. We're jumping to 1915 now. Remember, she wasn't famous yet, so not in the papers for a wee bit. Headline, quote, "Millionaires make mighty poor husbands," explained by Mrs. Sherburne Hopkins, Jr., who was married to 2 rich men and had to leave them both. End quote. Quote, "Here is the philosophy of it all. If you marry a poor man, you are the whole thing in his life. When the day's work is over, he comes home to you. He has nothing else to share his time, his affections, and his amusement with him. But if you marry a millionaire, you are only one toy among his many playthings. You are in competition with his yacht, his automobile, his club, his horses, his hunting, and his friends. Girls, don't ever marry a millionaire. Millionaires make the very worst husbands. They consider their wives only as a minor sort of incident in their lives. You can never be happy as the wife of a millionaire. Why, even Cupid hates a millionaire." End quote. So after Archer came Sherburne Hopkins, Jr., son of a very famous and rich lawyer. Peggy was 19 years old at this point, and she liked the idea of all of his money, and they eloped September 1st, 1913 in Bel Air, Maryland. And then she left her home in Washington and came to live in New York. Quote, "They say lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place, but this millionaire lightning struck me twice. I thought that my first unhappy experience as the wife of a rich man was only an accident, but when my second experience proved equally unhappy, I began to analyze things. That is exactly what I have done. I have left a handsome husband. He has gone down into Central America now to avoid heartbreaking scenes. I have left a very high social position in Washington, left my motor cars, my beautiful pedigreed dogs, my wonderful riding horses, my exquisite gowns and jewels, and come here, a stranger to New York, simply because, as the wife of a millionaire, my heart was breaking and I determined to be independent. When I marry again, I shall probably marry again sometime after I got my divorce. I shall be very careful not to marry a millionaire. Really, my first marriage was scarcely my fault. I was living at my home in Norfolk, Virginia. I'm a Southern girl and very proud of it. I was in high school with my golden hair hanging in a braid when I met Everett Archer of Denver, Colorado. He was 25 years old, tall, dark-haired, and handsome. He was also extremely wealthy. He had an immense fortune invested in oil holdings. For a year, we lived together quite happy. At least he was happy, and I was fairly contented. I told him very frankly I didn't love him madly, but was marrying him because he could provide so well for me." End quote. I'm sure he loved to hear that. February 1920. Once known as Washington's best-dressed woman, New York divorce courts finally freed her from her marriage to wealthy and temperamental Sherburne Hopkins Jr. And then she quickly married J. Stanley Joyce. Quote, "I will find true love, and I shall always seek it. If I must marry 100 times to find it, I'll do so." I married Sherburne because he was rich. It was just a difference of temperament. That was all. When I wanted to go on the stage to seek fame, when art called me, my husband wouldn't hear of it. End quote. October 1920. Now she's starring in the Ziegfeld Follies production of It Pays to Flirt and getting her third divorce. She was returning from France on a Cunard ship back to the U.S. and told reporters that she was going to sue her husband, if you need to keep track, it's J. Stanley Joyce at this point, for divorce. Joyce happens to be a millionaire Chicago lumberman. Quote, "I am going to sue him for divorce. I can say that no other woman is involved, and that is all I can say until I see an attorney." End quote. He had given her a home in Chicago worth $250,000 and jewels worth $1 million not long after their marriage took place, winter of 1919 in Miami. April 1921. This divorce from Joyce was going to get ugly. Back on May 29, 1920, Joyce sailed for Europe after he charged that she had on several occasions, quote, "struck, beat, and scratched," end quote, him. August 14, 1920, he left her, and that during the trip to Europe, she had illicit relations with the men listed as co-respondents to his suit. This would be Evans Spalding of New York, official at American Woolen Mills; Morris, famous dancer; Henri Letellier, editor of the Paris Journal; and Barton French, European sportsman. Spalding was not part of the Europe illicit relations. She, quote, associated with him, end quote, in New York, Palm Beach, and Miami after she came back from Europe. Joyce not only wants an annulment, but wants her to return all property and money that he gave her, and that the court, quote, make such other restitution as he sees fit, end quote. She went from Paris to Venice and back with Henri Letellier, an associate of Barton French in England, and was intimate with Morris during her stay in London. And E. James was also named as a correspondent. Apparently, London was a city with which he and Peggy were acquainted. Joyce was also alleging that she was already married when she married him in Miami January 23, 1920, and that she had conspired with her second husband, Hopkins, to get a divorce from Hopkins so she could obtain large sums of money and property from Joyce. September 1921. Rumors that Peggy has eloped with Henri Letellier, France's richest man, who also happened to have been one of the correspondents in the Joyce divorce hullabaloo. Apparently his mail is being forwarded to the Biarritz. And Peggy quit her hotel about 4 days ago and told her closest pals that she was going to the Biarritz. November 1921. Divorce is to be granted, and a settlement has been reached between the estranged spouses. She would receive $80,000 in a lump sum, keeps the jewelry given to her by her husband valued at $800,000, retains her furniture and cars and cash given to her valued at $404,200, gives up the jewelry given to her but not yet paid for in the value of $275,000, gives up all claims to her husband's estate, $3.3 million, and the $250,000 home he bought for her in Miami. According to a statement made by her through her attorneys, she accepted the settlement as she didn't want the case to drag out for years. She didn't want more strain on her apparently already endangered health, and she wanted the surveillance on her by her husband's detectives to cease. Joyce did not say much in the way of scandalous testimony during the proceedings, but left that to Mrs. Sadie Sodden, former social secretary, and Miss Hannah Nordstrom, Peggy's former maid, who spilled the beans on the many visits she had received. May 1922. Lying in bed and giving interviews, Peggy weeps because she can't tell the secret of her fatal fascination. Quote, "I liked their admiration," end quote, Peggy cried. Quote, "It was life to me," end quote. Ravishingly gowned in a blue negligee propped up in a bed frothy with silk and lace, the former showgirl, divorced wife of Stanley Joyce, drank beer and brandy, quote, "by the doctor's orders to strengthen my nerves," end quote, and smoked incessantly as she talked of her conquests of men and their tragic endings. Quote, "I don't know why men run after me," end quote, the girl who has had the wealthiest and most influential men of 4 continents at her feet declared in answer to a question. Quote, "I cannot tell you the secret of my fascination. Never, no, never did I deliberately try to lure them into my net," end quote. The latest of Peggy's victims, according to her claims, is young William Errázuriz, Chilean youth from a very wealthy family who shot himself in the room next to her suite on Sunday because, according to Peggy, she refused to marry him. Quote, "I've learned that I loved Billy, and now it's too late. I loved him, but I played with him. I dangled him on a string just as I did many others. Oh, why did I do it? I'm young. I'm in love with life. I ought to have been contented with the man I loved and who loved me. But that's the way of the game," end quote. She had her maids bring in her 2 small dogs who played on the bed she was laying in and stated, quote, "See, they are just like the men who love me. They do their tricks because they love me. I insist that they worship me," end quote. Quote, "The secret of my charm? I cannot tell. They don't care for the real me. Billy did, and now he's gone forever. I've learned my lesson. I'm through playing with men. My philosophy of life has changed. I'm going back to America and go into the movies," end quote. She was in Paris at this time of her bedside interview. Jacques Bretman, Parisian beauty expert, was asked about her power over men. Quote, "Peggy's attraction is physical. Her suitors are emboldened, knowing that they are playing with fire. Each attempts to outdo his predecessor to win her love. I do not find Peggy classically beautiful, at least not according to the standards of Venus de Milo. She was ill-proportioned as I viewed her," end quote. I'm guessing we don't need to worry about Jacques trying to marry her. So this was an amusing article about the medical reason for Peggy's allure. Oddly enough, the reason for her allure appears to be because of thyroid secretion and an excess of adrenal secretions. She attracts first through physical charms. Men like to kiss and hug her, but also be her knight in shining armor. Assessing some older photos of her, her face is said to be, quote, "hyperthyroid face, oval, delicate," end quote. Her later, more recent photographs, quote, "show a departure from the hyperthyroid, broadening of the lower part of the face, lower jaw is more massive, the lips are thick, and throughout the whole expression is coarser," end quote. This could be because of a lessening thyroid secretions or increased secretions from other glands. I'm not going to get into medical stuff, but I can't lie, this is both odd and interesting. But anyway, she apparently attracts men who have gland secretions like hers. But apparently not all of her admirers were hyperthyroid men, so I'm not sure where this article is going now. Quote, "Basing conclusions entirely upon her photographs and her activities and mode of life, as described in the press, I think it probable that she is undergoing a diminution in thyroid activity and an increase in adrenal medulla activity. These changes are gradually changing the personality of Peggy as they are changing her appearance. Her latest photographs show that in addition to the facial changes, she is becoming stout, another indication of diminishing thyroid activity. If these changes continue, the Peggy Hopkins of a few years hence will not be recognizable as the Peggy Hopkins of the Follies. But they say Peggy is wise, and when she can no longer attract the millionaire, she will have means enough to buy an impecunious prince who will take her and her past and her unbalanced gland system as part of the bargain." End quote. Wow, the blatant gland shaming. June 1923. Peggy and Lou Tellegen, or Tellegen, I'm not sure which, actor, are hopelessly in love and intend to marry, according to Peggy. Quote, "But we'll let our love undergo the time test and not act hastily." End quote. Apparently, this was also reported in December 1922, and nothing further that I could find. June 1924. Marriage number 4, quote, "the best known woman in the world," end quote, was married for the 4th time at Atlantic City to Count Gustav, aka Gösta Morner, a Swedish nobleman. This is the first time she's married for love. The couple, married after a brief courtship, are now in New York but will return to Chicago where the Count is in business. The couple married in Atlantic City June 2, 1924. February 1926. Count and Countess Gosta Morner have now separated and apparently are divorced. She was holed up at the Biltmore Hotel in L.A. but didn't comment. Apparently after they married, it was revealed that his attempts to make money, well, they didn't work out, and she'd been paying the bills. He had known that she had filed a suit in Paris, but he didn't know the status. Quote, "We haven't lived together for some time, but our relations have been amicable. I haven't communicated with Peggy for some time." End quote. The Count was most recently selling real estate in New York and wants to open a bookshop. April 1926. Headline, How to Handle Men. Quote, "Man is so small a part of the universe that he feels hopelessly puny and weak unless someone bolsters up his ego continuously. The individual who does this must do it so skillfully that he will never suspect that he is not the big, strong character he is being told he is. So whatever they say, girls, remember that they're right." One Stanley Comstock has proposed to Peggy. He's a multi-millionaire real estate agent in Florida and waits in Florida for her response. Quote, "The most married beauty in America," end quote, is on her way up to meet with him. Comstock met her at a nightclub, and after the first few days, he gave her a diamond and sapphire bracelet worth $19,000. A few nights later, they were seen at the Mayfair Club dance and seemed very cozy. The sapphires were allegedly as big as large marbles. Peggy then met his mama, charmed her, and was given consent. But Peggy has yet to give hers. Comstock formally announced his engagement to Peggy. She was there at the announcement, so seemingly it's for real and confirmed. No wedding date has been set. She plans to head to Europe later that month, and they are unsure if they will marry before or after. May 1926. Peggy revealed today that she has no plans to marry Comstock for now, not for 6 to 8 months. Her plans now are to try out a long engagement after initially seeming to say that they would be married soon. This might be because Mrs. Comstock, yeah, you heard me, Mrs. Comstock stated that she and Mr. Comstock were still not divorced, which means they're still married. Peggy intends to be very busy for the foreseeable future. She's going back to New York, then to Mexico for a tour, then to London for a stage engagement, and then to Paris to work on a movie. Quote, "Yes, I am engaged. Here's a picture of my new fiancé. Put it in the paper if you must. But I really can't see how my little engagement would be of any interest to the public." End quote. The little engagement does interest the public. They want to know how she does it. Why she does it. Why is the supply of Peggy Hopkins' Joyce husbands absolutely inexhaustible? And then, July 1926, Cupid's best customer. She has broken her engagement to Florida realtor Stanford Comstock. September 1928, marriage number 5. Her and the Earl of Northesk arrived together in New York, and apparently they intend to marry as soon as possible. January 25th, 1933. By Peggy Hopkins Joyce, written exclusively for International News Service. Motion pictures are the strangest things. I've been here only a few days, and I've discovered that already, and I can't imagine just what is going to happen when I start to work. They'll be rushing me over to Paramount at 8 o'clock in the morning to make some particularly romantic scene, and how in the world they expect me to be romantic at 8 o'clock in the morning is beyond me. And then after we've worked about 10 or 12 hours, some comedy sequence will have to be filmed, and who can be funny after a long day's work? But that's the picture business, I guess. I hope they give me dramatic, romantic roles, because that's what I like best. I don't think I'll miss the audience, but the work is so new and so different that I hardly know what to expect. I've brought 7 trunks and 15 bags full of the latest style creations with me, and I'll confess that I purchased many of them in Paris, but from now on, I'm going to follow this Buy American idea. It seems sensible, and after all, I am an American, even though I have a villa at Cap d'Isle in France. I'd sell it if I could. They're still asking me when I'm going to get married. It's also silly because lots of women have been married oftener than I. And anyway, why don't they give me a chance to get acquainted? I've only been here 4 days. End quote. Jots and jest. One thing you can say for Peggy Hopkins Joyce, she always keeps herself well groomed. That's a pretty good dad joke, I must say. February 1936, quote, "Men don't like to be harried or confused," end quote. This woman of many marriages insisted, quote, "Whoever said keep a man guessing you'll keep his love did a disfavor to all womankind who believed it," end quote. December 1936. Engagement recently announced. Pictures with Vivian Jackson, who rode a horse named Russet in the Hawthorne Hill races. Their marriage will follow his divorce. Fifth husband-to-be, Vivian Jackson, age 30, professor of astrophysics at London University. Peggy's in her 40s. This, she says, is love. Quote, because Peggy Joyce, the name, has somehow become synonymous with marriage, and because I'm so often forced to answer the question, let me satisfy any possible remaining curiosity. At the moment, there is no man in my life. I am neither engaged nor near engagement. Certainly I'll marry again when and if I ever meet another man with whom I can share love, companionship, and understanding affection. Not to marry such a man would be pretty foolish, don't you think? End quote. And to answer another question, Peggy, how do you do it? Why do men like you, find you interesting, compliment you, buy you flowers and gifts? End quote. That question is so easy to answer. Men are children. They don't like to be puzzled, confused, worried, harried by things they don't understand. Why should a woman treat a man differently than she herself would like to be treated? Men are naturally attentive and considerate. Women should be. Women like compliments. So do men. And men are just as quick as women to be suspicious of flattery. Too many women are overdressed. Men like simple gowns, chic little frocks, neatly tailored and conservatively smart wraps and hats. Too many women fail to realize that. End quote. Late December 1936. Unfortunately, Peggy and Vivian were riding in a sleigh from San Moritz to the town of Salarina when an accident occurred and Jackson passed away from his injuries. I can't even imagine how devastating that must have been, as she was there when it happened and had also suffered some injuries from the accident. We're jumping forward about 4.5 years to March 1941. This article by Louis Sobol, a popular Broadway columnist, was basically expressing his desire to get two of his unmarried friends together, Tommy Manville Jr., 4 times married and with more than a dozen girlfriends, Peggy, 4 times married and with more than a dozen boyfriends. Conservatively, it is estimated that Miss Joyce's quartet of marriages plus a cozy handful of near marriages has enriched her in jewels, bonds, real estate, and cash to approximate $3 million. Per Louis, once in a nightclub, Peggy said to me, quote, I'm getting very tired of this life. Champagne, stupid escorts, amorous companions, useless jewels and baubles. Know what I wish? I wish I could meet a nice young man whom I could marry. We would live in a little white cottage. No servants. I'd do the housework myself with my own hands. And every night I'd run out to meet him and fling my arms around his neck. Wait a minute, darling, he would say. I have a little surprise for you. He would reach into his pocket and pull out a little package, and in it would be the damnedest, biggest, greenest emerald in the world just for me. End quote. May 1956. Yes, we made quite a bit of a jump there. Revealed that she had actually married her 6th husband in 1953. On board the Queen Elizabeth liner with her husband, Andrew C. Meyer. She said that they were married in Switzerland. He had been formerly associated with the Bankers Trust Company, and this was his first marriage. She cannot say the same. They planned to go to Cannes, France, to stay at their villa there. June 1957. At this time, she was in New York in the Memorial Center for Cancer and Allied Diseases, having entered for treatment of throat cancer and was in critical condition. A few days later, Peggy passed away at the age of about 64 from throat cancer. After entering the hospital, she fell into a coma and a few days later passed away. In addition to what we already know, she appeared in a dozen or so movies but wasn't always happy with cinema. She covered a murder trial as a journalist, wrote her views on life for the New York Graphic. She published a fiction book called Transatlantic Wife. Fascinating life. I didn't even get into all of the alleged dalliances, and who knows if any of those were true. The issues regarding her jewelry and customs. Anyway, I hope she's resting in peace and happy, away from the speculating press. It sounds like she was always searching for love, and I hope that she was able to find it. Reading her quotes, I wasn't overly fond of her ways of going about things, but the heart wants what the heart wants, doesn't it? If you enjoyed this presentation, please like and subscribe to see future stories. Thank you.